necessary for everybody to have a grounding in what we're gonna talk about today, because even though right now, a small group of you are gonna be writing news stories and editorials, everybody eventually will write news stories and editorials. So if you have this on email, you can look at it and, know that we're not gonna be giving you a grade or anything, but this is just what we do, and it's a different type of writing. You're probably all good students, and you probably are all use the English language well and all that, but there are some specific rules for the way we do things, and we'd like you to try and get as close as you can to doing it, so that when you see it on the page, you'll know that it was your work and not us taking your notes and turning it into our work. We really would rather not do that. So we'll tell you quickly today, in a boot camp kind of way, what it is that we do in basic, hopefully, descriptions, and then we'll email it to you, and it's about 7 pages long, and you'll have it to go refer to as you're writing stuff.
And I'll also put it on the Google Drive also, so you'll have that access to it there also.
So does anyone here have any experience with journalistic writing? So Audrey, great. So does Audrey, see how good I am? The first thing I want to talk about is just basically how to write a news story. Have you heard of the inverted pyramid? Yeah.
I went to the school of journalism from Missouri West State, and they talked about that.
Okay. So the inverted pyramid, like in your first news writing class, they show you that it's like this, where your best stuff is at the top of your story, and though every word's important, as you go down through the story, your least important stuff is going to be at the bottom, and they call that the inverted pyramid. There's a couple reasons why you do that. Studies have been done that when you're working with print journalism, and I guess probably the same rules follow into what you see on the computer, people stay with you and then they don't.
Yeah.
So that by the time you get to the bottom of a story, you've probably lost them. And so you want to make sure your goal is to get as much information absorbed as you can. That's what you're going to be thrilled if you talk to someone after they read your story and they're going to say, oh yeah. And that's what you're going for. So you want to try to get your most important information up at the top. And basically too, if we're going to have space issues, because we want to get your work in the paper and we only have a double page spread to do it. So things that you write, unfortunately, are not going to get in the paper. Hopefully we'll get everything on the website, but some of it will not get in the paper. And that means that probably what you turn in is going to get cut. And if your good stuff is at the top, you've protected it. If it's at the bottom and you save something really good for the end, and we're not being careful editors, whop. So you want to put your good stuff at the top. Has anybody heard of the journalistic W's?
Oh.
Yeah, there you go. They've been saying that since I was your age. Maybe, I don't know though, pretty old. Who, what, where, when, why, and how. Put that in your head, because when you're doing your story, you're going to want to ask yourself, do I have who, what, where, when, why, and how? If you don't, then you might have a hole that you have to fill. And that's a word we use all the time when we're editing, is hole. And it's a bad word. So, oh man, you've got some holes in this story. So you're going to want to make sure you answer those questions. And again, don't worry about, I mean, if you take notes, I'll be flattered, I guess, but we are going to send this to you in writing. So don't stress. Who's heard of the lead?
The what?
The lead of your story.
The lead? Oh yeah, I heard it.
Okay. When you heard about it, did they spell it L-E-A-D or L-E-D-E?
I heard L-E-D-E.
Yeah, it's a cutesy kind of thing. The journalists say L-E-D-E, but you don't have to. Just so, because we're special and we don't spell it right. But it's the first sentence of your story. I put in here that it's your first paragraph, but that's because in journalism, a paragraph and a sentence are about the same thing, because we have very short paragraphs. It should be something that draws people in. Maybe that's gonna be because it's got dramatic information in it, like somebody was murdered on Main Street. Or maybe it's gonna be something creative that you come up with, that you know you have a boring story. So you're gonna write a creative lead that'll hopefully draw people into it anyway. So it's kind of, it's a very big deal for your story to come up with a good lead. And when we're editing your story, that might be the place where you get the most advice. Because if it's not one that works, then people will not read it. And that's your whole thing. You're just trying to get people to read what you write. So generally it should be short. When I was in school, they said try to get it in 20 to 30 words. Generally it should be one sentence. It is the kind of thing that you can break a rule if you have something creative going on that you know that what you're writing works anyway, even though it's longer, even though it's 2 sentences. But for us, we try short, 1 sentence. That's what we're going for when we're working on our deadline days. I have some that I pulled as examples. See if you can figure what this was about. There were screams and blood, wounds and tears. Sounds bad, but it was good. Screams and blood.
Oh, birth?
That's a good guess. I've been there. It's kind of like that. It was a mock disaster.
Oh.
It was fake blood.
Oh.
And if you had the pictures, you could have seen them. Festus City Council had a bad case of the hopefulies on Wednesday. That'd be hard to figure it out, but a budget story is really, really boring, and that was about their budget. So that was an attempt to have something a little bit more interesting than Festus City Council passed a $3 million budget on Wednesday. So you want to be a police officer, let's see those thumbs. It was a story about seatbelt usage, and for a time they had a campaign where police officers were supposed to go driving around, and if they saw that you had your seatbelt on, they were supposed to go. So anyway, that was that lead. And then a very short one, Bob Robertson is a footstep follower. This was a feature story about a guy whose father and grandfather had both been in education, and he was the president of a university. So anyway, you're gonna be, with whatever topic you have, you're gonna put your most creative energy into coming up with a good lead. And if you do get a good lead, you can mess up a whole lot of other things. And your editor will say, wow, that was a good lead. So, paragraphs should be short. My high school, English, I went to Festus High School, and my English teacher would see me out on the street, and for the years after I was writing for the paper, and say, man, I'm so tired of these short paragraphs. Because, in high school they teach you how to do a paragraph with all the information about how to do it. We'll have you do 2 or 3 sentence paragraphs, and if they're 4 sentences, we'll turn it into another paragraph. That's partly because we still deal in print, and if you have a long string of narrow copy in a column, it's very hard to read. So just from a pragmatic point of view, short paragraphs work well, and then plus they should just have one thought, and so one thought expressed in 2 or 3 sentences is what we're going for. Sometimes just 1 sentence. Don't use long words. We had a letter to the editor. Does anybody know what the word ovine means?
It's been a while. I need to brush it on.
That's
kind of, yeah. She used it for sheep. I don't know if it's specifically sheep or calf, but it was somebody who turned it in for sheep and as a letter. And she got real mad at us because we changed it to sheep. And then she called and said, well, we write for people, we try to communicate. If you tell them, yeah.
So, sorry, yeah, I was going to interrupt you. I just wanted to know, so what grade reading level would you consider? I know most articles are written like 9th grade, but
we say 8th.
8th grade?
Yeah, we say 8th. And the Wall Street Journal supposedly writes to an 8th grade level, so we don't mind copying the Wall Street Journal. But anyway, this letter writer, she called and she was all offended because we changed it to sheep, and then we said, well, you're sending people to the dictionary. You send us to the dictionary. She said, well, that's what I wanted to do. And then we said, 9 out of 10 people are not going to do that, so that means that you did not communicate. So we use basic, simple words, 8th grade level, If it's 5th grade level, I don't care. That's all right. Be very simple and basic. Okay, so when you have all these short paragraphs, you need transition words. It's a very important tool for you to have. And does anybody know what I might mean by that? Transition words?
It means words that you're gonna put in between each separate thought to
Right,
make it a
to
whole.
carry over
Link
from,
them.
to link it from one place to the next. And here's just an example. Kim and I both use the word however a lot, but however is a good one. As you can see how that
Additionally,
is,
like-
yeah. Despite,
Therefore.
therefore, that's on my list, regardless, just a simple word, but. That is not the case, like if you present a thought, and the next thought, specifically, you said, this school district encourages student voting. Specifically, so it's a linking word, and there's actually like a page in my journalism textbook that lists all the linking words. You'll find ones that you like, then your editor will say, you say in addition an awful lot, and then you have to pick something else. Okay, so there's 3 cardinal rules that you should have when you're writing your story. One that I have it number 1 because we think it's the most important. Be accurate. I don't even want to say the words fake news, but I guess I kind of have to. That's what we do. We try to be accurate and just from top to bottom, everything that we have reported, we want it to be accurate. There's no stupid questions, so when you're doing an interview, if you don't understand something that someone's telling you, and it takes you 4 times asking them from different sides, go ahead and do it, because you wanna make sure you understand it, so that you can communicate it accurately. Be fair. So by being fair, that means that when someone told you something, and you know that someone else, another source maybe has a different point of view, to be fair, you cannot leave out that other source. In our case, we always try. Sometimes the other source is not reachable or doesn't want to talk to you, and you have to say in your story that you tried. So we're hoping that you'll get the various sides of the story. If you can't, then we're going to say they sure tried, they tried and tried. Okay, don't make assumptions. This is a very, very easy thing to do. You aren't even aware when you're doing it. So just have that as one of your cardinal rules, to not make an assumption. Nail something down in your questions. We're hoping that the stories you write will have one of our primary elements to make something readable, and that's conflict. That's what news stories do. They explore conflict, and that's what that 2-3 sides of something means. It means that you're not just going to settle for this. Maybe they say that this is white, maybe say this is gray. You're going to say, oh no, they're both things these people believe in. And one thing I do try to stress, especially when I get phone calls from people who say we didn't do something right. What we present in our stories is not necessarily the truth. And that seems kind of contradictory. But when you've got this person who really believes this, and this person who really believes that, and they contradict, then which one's right? So
It's both, and the reader decides.
right. So you tell both versions, and you're not going to weigh in because you're the observer, but you're going to present those sides, and if they contradict, let the reader decide. And usually they do contradict. Kim has had a story where somebody's house got completely trashed with sludge from the sewage system, and the homeowner says it was the city's fault. The city says not our fault. So she tells both versions. She tells those stories, and then you read it, and she's not going to say, well, obviously this is the city's fault. She's going to let you make up your mind. Okay, elements of good writing. Organization. If you try to start your story and you don't know where you're going to go with it, especially just starting off, that's going to be really, really hard. I still make an outline, and I've been doing this a long time. But an outline. So just start with an outline. this is after you've done your interviews, you know what material you have, but you have to decide what's the most important. You have to decide how it fits on that inverted paragraph. So make it outline. Be clear. Clarity is the word I use. Make sure that what you write is understandable to people. Sometimes that means you catch that on your second time through or your third time through when you're looking at it. Can people understand what I wrote? And it's so much better if you ask yourself that question before you turn it over to the editor. Be brief. When people talk about the same thing, you get bored, you get annoyed. In your story, say things as briefly as possible. Get rid of extra words. I mean, we think brevity is like a saintly quality, so that's what you're going for.
The word that, look at your words, anytime you use that, is it really needed? Often it's not, usually it's not.
Yeah, and I always have to tell this story because I think it's really a good story. But when I was in journalism school for my first semester, at Thanksgiving, I was making an F in the course. I did get an A, just throw that in, eventually. But my instructor went through my story that I turned in. You'd go to class and you'd have a laboratory where they'd pretend to be police officers or firefighters and give you information, then you'd write the story. So he went through my paper, which was worth 100 points, and every time I used that he didn't think I needed, which was every single time, he marked 20 points off. So I was supposed to get 100 points on my story, I got a negative 30. I cried. Okay, we won't do that. So avoid fancy words, we already talked about that. Just use words that people know. Use your ear. I read my stories aloud to myself, well, aloud sometimes annoyingly. Yeah. I try to do it softly. Use active voice. I'm sure you've heard this in class. They don't want you to use passive voice in English either. It's wrong to say the vase was placed on the table by Tom. What should you say?
Tom placed the vase.
Yay! Tom placed the vase on the table.
Use someone doing the action, not the action happening to something.
Use lively, forceful verbs. Just because we're being brief and simple, you can still be creative with it. The tuba burped a few notes. Students marched to class. You know, you can still be creative. Focus on people. I'm hoping that you'll come up with stories where you'll have a person in the lead. Doesn't work all the time, but sometimes it does. Like if someone's going to have the assignment to write about teenage high school voting, you know, you just got to vote. A very cool lead would be finding someone who can tell you that. You know, Joe Jones, and then whatever he tells you. Doesn't work all the time, but when it does work, it's a way of having a complicated story. You draw the reader in with an individual, and then you get to the data. If you start with the data, they probably don't stay to second paragraph. Before you start a story, have your word count in mind. We're going to give you word counts for the main story, the sidebars, the editorials. Be aware of how much you have, and monitor yourself as you go. Because if you have 900 words and you have 2,000, you'll be screwed. Not like you. So, appeal to the senses. You can do that too, even though it's simple and direct. Use analogies. That means you compare and contrast, and that's where those transitions come in handy, like however and despite. Dig for the telling detail. Does anybody know what that means? What I'm saying by that?
The one that's kind of like the interest of the topic.
You're interviewing somebody and they're just telling you all this boring stuff. You think it's boring, and then they say something that you're like, that I can go with that. A story I used to edit the college paper at Jefferson College, and someone wrote about a exchange student. I guess at that level it wasn't really exchange, but somebody who was there from Japan. Apparently, this person had not had peanut butter. They came here and like loved peanut butter, and then had like a whole pantry full of peanut butter. So the person used that telling detail really as the lead of the story, and it was just really, really good. And sometimes when it's that kind of a thing, people say really cool stuff. So you're looking for that as you're interviewing people. Okay, I'm done. Quotes is the next thing, and Kim's gonna start there.
So, when you're writing your stories, a way to make it more specific with details, specific details, is to use quotes. So instead of just summarizing or paraphrasing what people have said, if you can get direct quotes, that's always good, but you have to be careful. You want to make sure that you get them directly, so you want to take good notes and perhaps even tape record. If you do tape record, you want to tell the people, I'm tape recording just for accuracy and try to make it as unobtrusive as possible, but it's important to get the quotes right, because if you misquote people, then you're going to be accused of not being credible, and they're not going to trust you the next time that you have to interview them. Here's a good example of, and you want to make sure that quotes are interesting. You don't want to quote just basic information. You don't want to quote someone saying, the meeting's at 6 p.m. Thursday at Festus High School. That's not a good quote. So here's an example of a good quote. And also, when you use quotes, you want to kind of set them up, but you don't want to say the same thing. You don't want to have a paraphrase and say the same thing as the, quote. So here's an example of that. So here's a good one. Joan said she learned a lot from the seminar. That's the paraphrase. You're setting up the quote. And the quote is, I came away with an understanding of how to rid my yard of snakes. So it's not the same thing, but it's a good, interesting quote. And it's set up with the paraphrase. A bad example would be, Joan said she learned at the seminar how to remove snakes from her yard. And then the quote is, I came away with an understanding of how to rid my yard of snakes. So they're saying the same thing. You don't want to do that.
You'd be surprised how many times people do this.
Yeah. Yes. But direct quotes add color. They're specific. You need to have quotes in your story. That doesn't mean that you can never summarize what someone says or paraphrase what someone says, because not everything they say is interesting or quotable. But you're looking for those good, interesting quotes to use. You want the quotes to include information, things that people haven't heard before, interesting quip, or something that's not just common things that are said every day. Let's see. And in your story, sometimes you'll use quotes from people, and then they'll get cut, and you're like, well, why did you, not use that quote? They said it. Well, it wasn't interesting. It said the same thing that you'd already summarized or paraphrased. So it's important that you get good, interesting quotes. Now, I already said that it's important to get the quotes right, to quote them word for word. But sometimes people will use grammar that's not correct. You don't want to always correct their grammar, but if it would be embarrassing to them, if they say something that sounds really dumb, you're quoting the mayor of a city or the superintendent of a school, and they say something that's really ungrammatical and sounds bad, you can change one word to make them sound a little better. But for the most part, you want to quote them word for word.
If you are to change a quote, it's a really, really big deal. So you might even want to ask your editor about it.
Yeah, and maybe even put the word that you're changing in parentheses within the quote to show, that it's not
Why don't
word
you
for word.
Okay, that was my question here. Over here was, would you do parentheses or brackets if you were gonna put it in?
We use parentheses.
Okay.
A lot of papers do use brackets. That's a
Okay.
good
I was always
question.
taught brackets.
Yeah.
So.
It's a good question. We use parentheses, and it is a little confusing because sometimes you're going to be using for us, we're using those parentheses to show this is what they really meant, but this is the direct quote. But then sometimes it's because it's parenthetical material. So it is a little confusing. Maybe someday we'll change.
And then sometimes they'll be talking about a person that it's not clear if you don't say who the person's name is, that they'll say, he was a real jerk, and we're not sure who he is in this quote. So in parentheses after he, you'll put the person's name, or to show who they're talking about. When you're using quotes, you wanna just say, he said, or, you know, Mr. Smith, well, not Mr., but Smith said, or says sometimes, but normally said, we use the past tense. You don't wanna try to get too creative with your attributions, you know, he quipped, he claimed, he said jokingly, you know, just he said.
Emphasized.
Yeah, you want that to just be ignored almost. You don't want people's attention to be drawn to that attribution. So he said, people are just gonna skim over that, and that's what you wanna use. Off the record, so, you know, if you're talking to a source and you're, you know, hoping to get quotes and good things to say, sometimes they'll say, well, I'll tell you something off the record. And it's really important if someone says that it is off the record. Stop taking notes, stop recording, don't tell other people what they said. That is very important for building trust with your sources, is they have to know that if they're telling you something off the record, it stays off the record. And sometimes you don't even want to waste your time with all this off the record stuff. You know, if you're wanting just some specific information and you get this source and they're saying, well, I'll tell you off the record, but that's it. Well, you don't want to sit and listen for an hour. Sometimes you do because you want background, you want to understand. But, you know, maybe you don't want to spend an hour just getting off the record stuff and you're not going to get anywhere with it. So you can tell them, well, you know, if you can't tell me anything on the record, then that's it. You know, I'm not going to waste my time with it.
In a nice way.
In a nice way, yes, yes. In a nicer way than that. And that sort of is a way to segue, I guess, into building rapport with sources. So when you're calling someone to talk to them, they don't really know you. You know, you want to start light. You don't want to start with the hard-nosed question from the very beginning. So I hear you fired so-and-so. Why? You know, you start with something that he might want to talk about. Oh, you know, I saw your new addition at the school. That was really nice. And, you know, start light, start a conversation, build a little rapport with the person. Start with your easier questions. Well, let me get some of the basic information first. You know, get their name. And even though the guy's name might be John Smith, make sure you ask how to spell it. Johnsmith. Maybe it's Jonsmythe. You know, you don't know for sure, but always ask how to spell their name and repeat it back to them. But start off with the basic information, you know, the name, easy stuff, and build up to the questions you know they're really not going to want to talk about.
So why did you fire your mother?
Yeah, yeah. And so hopefully by that time, you know, you've built a little bit of rapport and they're talking to you, and when you get to that tough question, they're going to be a little more willing to talk to you about it. So before all that happens though, you're gonna want to prepare for your interviews with people. So some of the basic stuff, just as far as presenting yourself, you know, if you're gonna meet this person, you wanna think about how to dress. If you're meeting a real professional person, you wanna look professional yourself. If you're covering a game where everyone's, you know, dirty and sweaty and in shorts, then, you know, you can be more casual. But so you wanna, you know, present yourself well. And then you want to know a little bit about the subject and the person. You know, if you're assigned, hey, I wanna write about, you know, the election of the county collector. Well, don't go in there cold and not even have any idea what is a county collector. Do a little research, you know a little bit about it. So go in prepared, know who it is you're wanting to talk to, have questions ahead of time, you know, so make sure you've already thought about all these questions, have them written down. If you're talking to them on the phone, you know, you already have them written and you can just go down and answer the questions and type in your answers right there. So you want to be prepared for your interviews. You're going to have questions that you know you want to ask, but don't just stick by your questions. They answered them and that's it. You know, be willing to, if they say something that, oh, I didn't think about that angle, you know, then go from there, and maybe that prompts you to have more questions on the spot. So,
And that's a really hard thing to kind of to learn. You've thought about it, and you have your list of questions, and you're dedicated to your list of questions, and you've gone through the whole thing, and you know that you've had everyone answer. It's a really irritating thing to you personally if you write your story and then your editor says, well, what about, and it's something so obvious, and you didn't ask it because you only looked at your list. So, like she said, you have to be nimble and flexible. Just
Think on your feet.
Yeah, you're actually paying attention to what they told you and then raise a new thing for you to ask about. So you have to be very alert. It's really kind of cool because
It's fun.
it makes you feel smart.
And you'll probably even you'll prepare, you'll interview, you'll ask your questions, and then something else will come up as you're writing the story or when your editor's reading it. Something else. Oh, well, they said this. What about this? And you'll probably have to go back once or twice and ask more questions. So you have to be willing to do that. Most people who are talking to you want to tell you, want to inform you, want to educate you about their job or their program or whatever it is you're asking them about. Most times they're going to want to talk to you, so they're not going to mind. I mean, it's best to be prepared so you don't have to call them 100 times, but if you have to follow up with 1 or 2 calls, most people aren't going to mind, and so don't feel too shy or embarrassed about it. It's just a normal thing that everyone does. That's pretty much it.
Especially when you're starting off, in-person interviews might be good. If you're going to be talking to someone about the first time they voted or someone who you think might be that lead in the story, an in-person interview is good if you have time. But we understand that that's difficult. We used to say that we would not do email interviews, and people are text interviews. When people are doing this, they go back and they correct, they change, it comes off as very clinical and you can't hide it in your story.
It doesn't sound as real. It's more stilted, but
But in the interest of being real in today's world, sometimes you have to settle for that. That's your second choice. But if it's the only way you're going to be able to do it, then we accept it. Probably you're going to want to say in a story, however, at least one reference to said in an email or said in a text. After that, then people know that they've been using the device. You don't have to say it 17 times. But you probably do want to let people know that this was not all extemporaneous. Okay, so that was like 3/4 of a semester. You guys did very well. You'll get an A. But we'll email it to you, and I hope that as you turn it into us, that you will look through it and say, okay, did I do this? Did I do that? Because it'll save us all a lot of time.
one thing I forgot to mention though, as far as the questions that you ask people, it's good to have some open-ended questions. You don't want to have all questions that are just yes or no answers. Then you're not going to get any good quotes at all. So you do want to ask some open-ended questions instead of just, do you like your job? They're going to say yes or no. Yeah. What do you like about your job? What's your favorite part of your job? What's your least favorite part of your job? Then they're going to tell you some things, and you'll have the chance of getting some quotes. So that's important too. And I often, especially like feature stories, at the very end I'll say, is there anything you'd like to tell me that I didn't think to ask? And often they will. So that's a good way to end an interview.
And virtually everybody in our newsroom does that very thing. I guess we learned to do that because we realized that probably there's been this happen sometime during the conversation. So it's a real good thing to have on you. And I will always ask, what did I forget to ask? Okay?
Okay, so I'm going to hand the phone to somebody else, and I'm going to talk to you guys about the most terrifying thing you heard today. Just hold it and point it at me.
Everybody turn around.
So is this the right way to do it?
Nope.
No,
Do you see me? Do you see me in the screen?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, then you're good.
Okay.
So, the most terrifying thing for us, technology. The terrifying thing for you guys, probably the telephone. We use the telephone. We call people on the phone. So who has made a telephone call this weekend? We spoke on the phone.
Oh, it's a miracle.
Yes, yay, thank the Lord. So telephones are kind of scary for young people, and I get it. Now you're gonna call people you don't know. So that's also scary. Even if you're gonna do your interview in person, you have to call them and set up the interview. You can't, we're not gonna just
pop in and say, I'm here to interview you, because it's probably not going to work. They don't have time. They don't have a place for you.
They're not
So we're going to have to, they won't be there. So we're going to have to call somebody and set up an interview. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to get their phone number. So how do we get somebody's phone number?
Maybe through the website they have.
Maybe a website. There is this old-fashioned
Phone
thing
book.
called a phone book, but almost no one has a phone book or their number in the phone book anymore.
'Cause they have
So
cell
yeah,
phones,
getting
yeah.
somebody's phone number that you don't know is hard. So, for example, today we're going to look up and call a couple of people to try to set up interviews on the first round of these news stories. So we have some phone numbers that we've collected, and we have, so you can ask people for phone numbers. You can, and always when you're talking to them, so you're doing your interviews, always say, and what's your phone number, so that you can build your own little phone number database. Because later on, when Peggy and Kim edit your story, I 100% guarantee there's going to be a question, and they'll say, well, how old is that person? Well, they're a high school senior. Well, does that mean they're 17, 18, 19? How old are they? How many years? So you'll have to call, you don't want to have to you could text them on their phone, and that would work out okay for that kind of thing, but you need their phone number. You need their contact information. Also, emails also is a good thing. So before you leave, you want to make sure you've got their name spelled right and their contact information, which means a phone number and an email if they use email. So that's guaranteed. You're going to need that later. And then later on, we can share it with somebody. So you do an interview with somebody who's a young campaign worker, and then whoever's photographing that person, you need them to set it up. So you need to share that information with the next person. So we'll all be collecting names and emails and phone numbers and keeping good notes that we can all read later. Because that's the other thing that's a little bit tricky. You write it down in the moment, you're writing written notes. In the moment, you can read it. You take it back 2 weeks from now, there's not a chance you can read that anymore. So you need to, if you are not working on your stories right away, which is very likely because you're busy people, you want to transcribe your notes in some form or fashion. Kim and Peggy talked about tape recording your conversations. So I'm sure none of you use a tape recorder. So recording on your phone is perfectly fine. You do want to tell them you're recording it, and recording it for accuracy. That should make everybody feel more comfortable. You can also videotape your interview, which anybody who's on the multimedia team will say, yes, because then we can cut together those great direct quotes, also make great sound bites.
Yeah.
So they're also the things so if you can use your phone, so if you could just, I don't know if anybody has a little tripod for their phone or any kind of thing that you can record while you're interviewing, it's just sitting there. You ignore it, they ignore it, it's just running, but then you can refer back to it. It helps you with your accuracy going forward. And he's like, oh, they had a funny thing about knocking on doors, and what did he say exactly? And then you can go back and listen to it again. And then you can mark on there, well, that was at number 80, whatever. Timestamp on there. So then you can pass that on to Joseph or whoever's doing the multimedia. It's like, oh, this is a good one here. You'll want to have that. So everybody has a phone that has that capability to do videos.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so video, however we say it, video your interviews if at all possible. If you want to take a partner or a helper, like obviously it's not going to be easy for you guys to partner with each other all the time because you're far apart. Now, if you can, that would be the best. If you and you go to the same interview and you videotape and you do the other interview, that would be awesome. But is your schedule obviously going to work? Maybe, maybe not. So if you can go together, great. If you can't, you can take somebody like your little brother or your mom or somebody from school who's your friend who was going to go anyway. Or you Hillsborough people, you can work together on those things. Then they can worry about making sure that the person's in frame and the person is not oddly wandered off to the side and only you get their ear in the video. So those are some things you want to keep track of too. These are things that are hard. That's okay. Hard for us as old school journalists because mostly my tool is right there. Notebook, pen. That's all I need. For new journalists, which you guys are all this, yours has one more element. There needs to be video, audio, some kind of multimedia component. So I don't want you to be fooled into thinking that that's not going to be part of jobs in the future. That's part of it. That's really going to be part of it. So we're going to do it now. We'll all get better at it. We're going to learn how to videotape and which way to hold the phone.
I'm perfect at it now. It was hard, but I mastered
Look,
it.
now she's a pro. I bet I'm all in frame and everything. So then later I'm going to figure out how to get the dang thing on YouTube, and we'll be perfect. Or maybe on Facebook. So anyway, that was a lot of information. So does anybody have any question right now that's burning? They're just like, oh, let's not go past this until, okay, yes.
So if we ever needed to set up an interview, could we ever use the leader office?
Yes,
as
absolutely.
space?
Yes, you can use it, and basically it's available 24/7. So you guys, if you need to have that, that's perfectly fine. In my experience, the best thing to go do when you're interviewing is to go to their place, because they're comfortable and confident in their space. So if you can go to their office, their house, their wherever they are.
But the one thing I would say is that I would rather that you guys do not go to someone's house by yourself.
Alone, yes.
Yeah.
I was gonna get there. You wanna
Okay.
be safe, and so you wanna all be, so the partner thing is also really good there. You wanna, don't go by yourself.
And I actually also think that before you go to someone's house, you should run it by us.
Yeah, talk to us
Yeah.
first.
Yeah, the office of your teacher or superintendent, those things are safe. But yeah, going to some person you don't know to their house.
Maybe
Yeah.
I say, yeah,
Yeah.
we don't want any stories like that. We only want stories that we're planning. So yeah, so think carefully about those things. But if you can be where they are, you can see things, and they're more comfortable, and then you can say, well, my gosh, he has like 8,000 baseball gloves hanging up on his wall. What is that about? Why, is that something that's interesting? Or there's campaign posters from the ancient times that are in there. So where did those come from? How did it collect it? So if you can, but like they said, be safe. Don't go by yourself. Tell us first before you go. So maybe one of us can go with you and help that first interviews, and we'll guide you through that, introducing yourself. So when you arrive to do your interview, you're gonna say, hi, so this is also hard. The very first part of it, so you want to say your whole full name, and you're going to say, I am with the leader. And you can say, I made up our name of Teen Advisory Board, which is kind of a terrible name. So if we want to come up with a better name, let's do that. But we'll say, so my point is, you're going to say you're with the leader, you're working on a story, and it would be published in the paper. So that people are clear that what they're telling you is to be appearing in print and in multimedia.
On the record.
So it's on the record. It's not a surprise. We don't want anyone to ever open the paper and say, what? I'm in the paper? I didn't know that was going to happen. So that's 100% of the time, all of our photographers and reporters, it's basically how you start the conversation. This is Peggy Scott from The Leader. I'm calling to do a story about your corn maze that's shaped like the bicentennial logo, which is what I'm working on later today.
And one thing that you will
It's very cool.
You'll be surprised when this happens, but it happens to us all the time. Someone will call and say, but Peggy Scott promised me it would be in the paper.
Yes, that's the other thing.
So just be sure to make that people know that you're gathering information and you don't know
May
for
or may not.
sure what will make the paper or what will make the website, but you're collecting. Sorry, I cut off.
Oh,
your
you're
head.
fine.
No, you had no
We
head.
can still hear you on the video.
So yeah, and that'll probably happen to you anyway. But just so you know, that's something people claim and it's not true. But,
And I thought of something when she was talking a minute ago too. People who are younger than 18 really, you need to make sure that you have permission if you're interviewing a student about their voting. If they're younger than 18, we need to have permission that they can be photographed and written about in the paper. So most schools have a policy where any students who don't want their photos to be published, they sign something and the schools know about it. So just make sure that they're a person who it's okay to have their photo in the paper.
And I'm sure you guys all have relatively decent relationships with your principals and administrators at your school, so you can tell them, hey, I'm working on this story, I'm working on this essay, I'm working on with them, I'm gonna talk to Joseph. Is there a problem? And then if the principal says,
Yeah.
Don't, not that one. And then you say, well, do you have another suggestion or something like that? But then you'll know. So that's safe. Trying to think if there's any other. Okay, so let's talk about, we can probably turn off, boot camp is over. Now we're moving to press the